Don't worry, it will all be over by Christmas. That's what they said, in their homes, in the street, in the pub. Hostility to Germany and a willingness to get involved was increasing all the time, but many thought it was still mainly a continental problem and it would all come to nothing, sooner rather than later. Anyway, it was unlikely that Britain would be threatened. After all, Britain was still an international superpower with a huge empire and a navy that other countries could only dream of. If anyone threatened Britain, they were certain to get a lot more than they bargained for. And that is what happened. But as they went about their daily lives, the British people had no conception of the price that they would have to pay for victory. But in the meantime, the summer of 1914 was warm and sunny, and people just wanted to make the best of it. But in Parliament there was increasing concern. Since unification of the German states in 1871, the country had become stronger and stronger, and now had a population double that of Britain. Its economic progress had been rapid, and it had become an industrial powerhouse led by the massive Krupp's steelworks. Britain may have had the world's biggest navy, but Germany was catching up fast, and this was a huge worry to the British government. It was the Royal Navy's dominance of the high seas that gave Britain her supreme level of power and influence throughout the world, and this could be put under threat by powerful Germany. By 1914, Germany had become a force to be reckoned with, especially now that it was part of a triple alliance with Austria, Hungary, and Italy. The risk of this strong alliance blowing Europe apart became increasingly clear to other European governments. But an East-West alliance between France and Russia was expected to keep German ambitions under control. In reality, the opposite happened. The German people felt constrained and oppressed, and feelings of nationalism soared. They were led in their beliefs by Kaiser Wilhelm, who wanted the country to break out and to build an empire to rival, or better, those of Britain and France. This was music to the ears of the German people, who felt their time had come. Their date with destiny was approaching. Everything seemed to be falling into place for Germany. The country had built up a strong, well-equipped regular army, and new up-to-date fighting ships were regularly coming off the stocks. The workers at Krupp's were working 80-hour weeks to try and meet demands for steel and armaments. Despite this, Germany was not quite ready to go to war in 1914. Building military power is expensive, and the country was feeling the strain. However, events in Sarajevo brought things to a head. The murder of Count Ferdinand and his wife by Serbian nationalists in June 1914 generated massive bad feelings towards the Serbs. And in July, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. What many people expected and dreaded had now begun. Kaiser Wilhelm was initially concerned that France, with assistance from Britain, would lead an assault on Germany. But gradually he came to believe that his fears were groundless. He convinced himself that Britain would not become involved, and if she did, it would not make much difference anyway, because her regular army was pitifully small, and many soldiers were committed to maintaining stability in Ireland. Germany would easily be able to crush the old-fashioned army of France, and then she would turn all her attention to defeating Russia, which would also not be difficult, because Russian forces, although huge, were very poorly trained and poorly equipped, at best a basic peasant army. Germany's wish to dominate Europe was there for the taking, and was all going to be surprisingly easy. The Kaiser was a very happy man. So war it would be, and Germany did not even have to draw up a war plan. It already had one, the Schlieffen Plan. This plan, drawn up by Count von Schlieffen in 1905, was a simple but precise blueprint for waging and winning a war in Europe, initially dealing with a Franco-German war, but later versions involving an attack on Russia. The plan was to first concentrate on defeating France, which they fully expected to do within 6 weeks, and then to transfer their efforts to defeating Serbia and the unprepared Russia, which they thought would only take a few months more. On the 1st of August 1914, Germany put their plan into action and declared war on Russia, the ally of Serbia. The German people were ecstatic. What an opportunity this would be for Germany to attain her rightful place in the world. Thousands cheered the Kaiser as he stood on the balcony of the Berliner Schloss on the day war with Russia was declared. The next day, following the rules of the Schlieffen Plan, Germany invaded Luxembourg. The plan envisaged an attack on France via Belgium and Luxembourg because heavy defences and difficult terrain made crossing the French-German border too risky. A demand to Belgium for free passage was rebuffed by King Albert within hours, but on the 3rd of August, the Germans invaded the country anyway, thus triggering Britain's involvement. Many years previously, Britain had given Belgium an undertaking that her neutrality would be protected, and Britain, with great honour, stood by their promise. On the 4th of August, Britain declared war on Germany. British troops were mobilised immediately, and within a few days, Lord Kitchener, by popular acclaim, was made Secretary of State for War. Kitchener realised straight away that this was not going to be a short war, and that the size of Britain's army had to be increased substantially. A countrywide recruitment campaign was put into operation immediately. The British people were tremendously patriotic at this time and wanted to punish Germany for its incursion into neutral Belgium. They were proud that Parliament had stood by the country's promise to Belgium, and that the world had seen that Britain's word meant something. Thousands of men flocked to enlist, encouraged by the many recruitment posters that were produced, and sometimes as a result of pressure from other members of their local communities. Queues soon formed at the recruitment centres. In Liverpool, Lord Derby encouraged men to join up along with their friends and workmates to form battalions of local groups that would train and, if necessary, fight together. He coined the term Pals regiments in his statement. This should be a battalion of pals, a battalion in which friends from the same office will fight shoulder to shoulder for the honour of Britain and the credit of Liverpool. Men joined the Liverpool regiments in their thousands, and by the end of October, 4 battalions had been formed, with enough potential recruits available to form 2 more. Other towns and cities followed, and there were soon over 200 Pals regiments in training. Many of the Pals recruits saw this as a way of escaping from the drudgery and toil of working conditions of the time, and also perhaps saw the opportunity to train and fight with their work colleagues as a big adventure. Some may have joined up because of peer pressure at their place of work, but whatever the reason, None of them could have foreseen what they would be facing on the battlefield. In all, up to 6,000 men are thought to have joined the Liverpool Pals battalions, and in 1915 they were sent across the Channel to fight. They soon learned the realities of trench warfare, with half of them never to come home again.
The Liverpool Pals Memorial Fund was set up in March 2011 with the express ambition of placing a permanent memorial to the memories of over 2,800 men who joined the Liverpool Pals in 1914, never to return home. We had the Duke of Westminster and Lord Derby as our patrons, and we were funded throughout by the public and many groups who took an interest in the Pals, one of which was the Sefton Art Group, which we're very, very grateful for all the support we received. On August the 31st, 2014, 100 years to the day since the Liverpool Pals joined up and enlisted over at St George's Hall, a memorial, a permanent memorial, was unveiled at Lime Street Station. Tom Murphy produced a fantastic frieze in 2 parts, telling the story of the Liverpool Pals, right the way from their formation over at St George's Hall, through to their departure from Liverpool in April 1915, onwards to the battlefield experiences, and finally the more rather subdued homecoming of the remaining Pals, the survivors. And Tom actually finished the frieze off with a fantastic touch, which was the modern day remembrance services over at St George's Hall. All in all, it was 3 years hard work, painstaking work, but a labour of love for all of us concerned. The memory of the Liverpool Pals should never be forgotten. They were very brave lads, boys in some instances, who gave up, most of them, very well-paid jobs to sign up for King and Country at the time of the country's greatest need. Many, over 2,800, never returned home to the loved ones, and their memory drove us on. Many lie in graves in France and Belgium, some in Russia, many on the memorials to the missing in France and Belgium. Now in Liverpool they have a permanent memorial to their sacrifice. Thank you.
In August 2014, 100 years after World War I began, a memorial to the Liverpool Pals was unveiled at Liverpool's Lime Street Station by the Earl of Wessex. The memorial was designed by the sculptor Tom Murphy, who created many sculptures on display in Liverpool, including a bronze memorial to Captain Noel Travas, a Liverpool-based doctor whose heroics during World War I when tending injured soldiers on the battlefield are legendary. On numerous occasions, with the assistance of volunteers, Dr. Travas entered no man's land to search for and help the wounded, sometimes only 25 meters from an enemy position. Although wounded many times, the doctor carried on with his work until one day in 1917, it all came to an end when a shell hit the first aid post where he was resting. He survived the explosion, but died later from his injuries. Dr. Travas received the rare accolade of being awarded 2 Victoria Crosses and the Military Medal. The Liverpool Pals Memorial takes the form of a huge cast bronze frieze and shows the proud workers joining up to serve their country and then facing the horrors of war. Despite surprisingly strong resistance from the Belgian army, with the support of the British Expeditionary Force. The German army swept through Belgium, capturing most of the country within 3 weeks. They then continued their advance through northern France, pushing the rapidly retreating French and British forces before them. However, when the fighting reached the River Marne, the Allied forces stopped retreating, and on the 5th of September began a fierce counterattack. This took the Germans by surprise, and despite very heavy French and British casualties, the German advance was stopped in its tracks, and the German generals decided to dig in. They really had no choice. Their army was exhausted by heavy fighting, and some units had been transferred to the east, where Russia was putting up a stronger fight than was expected. And so began 4 years of the horror and futility of trench war stalemate. The race to the coast began as each side worked to set up defensive positions. Thousands of miles of trenches were dug between Switzerland and the English Channel. And the carnage of trench warfare, where each side would face heavy losses just to gain perhaps a few meters of ground, would continue for the next 4 years. So many troops were being lost that more and more effort had to be put in at home to encourage men to enlist, and in 1916 conscription had to be introduced. Troops were away fighting. Those at home had to try and cope with life as best they could, always wondering what was happening to their loved ones in the fighting. People flocked to the music halls to hear performers such as Mary Lloyd and Bester Tilly perform some of the many songs which were written to tie in with the national mood of the time. Many of these songs are still well known today.
They were summoned from the hillside, they were called in from the glen, and the country found them ready at the sterling call for men. Let no tears add to their hardship,
When it all came to an end in 1918, nearly 5.5 million British and Commonwealth troops had served on the Western Front, and over 900,000 were killed, and over 2 million wounded, many very badly.
But it was not just people who served Britain in World War I. When the war started, the British Army had only around 25,000 horses, but many more were needed to carry supplies and to draw wagons and gun carriages. Over 1 million British horses and mules were conscripted to take part, and they suffered as did the troops. Each year around 1/5 of them were lost, in part due to enemy action, but mainly as a result of neglect and exposure. Some dead or sick horses were used to feed the troops, but losses were so great that many had to be buried in mass graves. When it was all over, only 62,000 horses are thought to have survived. Some of the younger and fitter horses made it back to Britain as army horses, but most ended up in the hands of continental butchers, their service to Britain not now counting for anything.
There were also thousands of army dogs, many of which had been donated to the war cause by their owners, although some were conscripted. They were trained to act as sentries, to carry messages between posts, to carry supplies to injured soldiers, and even to draw carts. They soon became targets for enemy snipers, and many were shot or blown to pieces by artillery. But it wasn't just the bullets and shells that were dangerous. This image shows an army dog with its paws bandaged because of burns caused by enemy chlorine gas which lay on the ground. Most of the dogs that survived the war made it back to Britain, but then they weren't really needed anymore, and most are thought to have been put down. As with horses, their contribution to the war effort was soon forgotten. And then there were the carrier pigeons. These little messengers were invaluable to the war effort, carrying messages back from the front or even back to England. They were remarkably successful, and each time they were released, they had a 95% chance of reaching their destination, despite being targets for enemy rifles. But they made many journeys and thousands were killed. Their bravery, however, is legendary, and there are many accounts of the birds being mortally wounded by enemy fire, but just managing to hold on long enough to make it back to their lofts with their messages before dying of their injuries. At home they were considered so important that special protection was afforded by law, and harming one, even accidentally, could result in a fine of £100 or 6 months in prison. On the 11th of November 1918, the armistice was formally signed, and finally it was all over. Troops were demobilized, and they made their way home back to their families. But they would have found that things had changed a lot since they left. They might have noticed that there were many more mechanized vehicles on the streets, and that men and ladies' fashions were a bit different. But what really would have surprised them was how the role of women had changed. The soldiers had seen how women had become involved in the war effort, with hundreds helping behind the lines as nurses or ambulance drivers. But they couldn't have fully appreciated how the position of women had changed at home. So many men had joined the army that factories and offices didn't have anything like enough staff left to do the work. Thousands of women were ready and willing to fill the gap, and were soon doing jobs that many men thought they probably couldn't do. The level of fighting meant that vast quantities of munitions were needed, and thousands of women were engaged in production of shells, often at great personal risk. When the men returned, they expected to get their old jobs back right away, and there was some conflict when women did not want to give up their new way of life, especially now that some women had, for the first time, been given the vote. The role of women in society had changed, and there was no going back. But for some soldiers, the war did not end with their return home. Many were so badly injured, mentally or physically, that their lives would never be the same again. The country that had needed them to fight the Germans didn't seem to want them anymore, and many ended up begging on the street. But at least the war to end all wars was over, and people rejoiced in the thought that everyone could now live in peace and not have to go to war again. No one could have imagined that just 21 years after the armistice was signed, it would all happen again, and next time it would be even worse.
It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Piccadilly, farewell, Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, 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 while you've a Lucifer to light your